I would like to request my panelists to introduce themselves.
I am Leo.
I'm Wei, and I'm the panel of this round.
All right, I invite the Prime Minister to open the case for side opening government. Here, here.
Okay. Panel, when half oh, sorry, I haven't pressed the start button. Okay. Panel, when half of all pro-Brexit voters vote on the basis that the UK is losing money because of Brexit, when half of all Donald Trump voters vote for him because of the fact that they believe that Hillary Clinton is running some kind of pedophile sex ring, we think that there's an inherent problem with social media companies printing fake news. What is our setup under opening government? Firstly, we're going to prosecute these companies to the fullest extent of the law. We will make it legal grounds for prosecution. We define fake news as something that is false. It is factually proven to be false. We think that if any company is going to post something like an opinion piece or an assumption, they have to say and make it explicitly clear that this is an assumption, this is not factually proven. We think that is necessary. We are going to say that this is the type of thing that is going to streamline companies into like making some sort of panel where they can accurately judge whether something has been proven or not. Everything has to be passed through that panel before they can print. It is opposition's burden to prove why exactly they would allow the spread of fake news, the rigging of every election in society, the continuous presence of racist rhetoric being put aloud without any sort of recourse. We're going to posit that most of the time, most of the news that you receive is online, and it is the most viral form of news. This debate is about accuracy versus a lack of accountability. Before I go on, yeah, go ahead.
Are social media the ones who produce these fake news?
I think it's so much of a matter of how social media just produces this news, but I think everything goes through this kind of filter. So for instance, the fact of the matter is that even if you don't produce it, you still reprint it under the impression that it's already been checked. We think that that is just as harmful as anything that can push. So first, we have 2 points for you today. First, fake news corrupts the tenets of democracy, and second, how we establish control of what is factually correct. So under why fake news corrupts democracy. Number one, I think it abuses the name of news and it creates an availability bias. The availability bias is to say that anything that's available to you is something that you are going to believe because that's most accessible to you. Also, I think that when individuals look at fake news, like social media companies like BuzzFeed, like Facebook in certain instances, or like online social media presences, these people think that it's already been checked. They have a kind of bias that it goes through the same kinds of check and balances as traditional media. The reason why traditional media is often looked at as more sound is because of the checks and balances that we would like to put in place, that it should be factually correct. Also, for the second thing is that individuals aren't going to question this kind of thing. But it's also an irreversible process, right? Because even if I post a correction video after posting the fake news, it's not going to get nearly as many hits. It's not going to get nearly as many likes. That proves to you that it's irreversible. We want to start with the prevention of this thing in the first place. Second analysis, it gives power to the elite in society. I have two aspects to connect on this. First, on politics. News can be very dangerous, ladies and gentlemen. The printing and the publishing of things like the Pizzagate scandal under Hillary Clinton, the printing and publishing about how Joe Biden is allegedly a sexual harasser, is something that hurts campaigns, that can defame people. But it is not only the fact that it defames people, but the fact of the matter is it can create and incite violence based on itself. Because it can take literally anybody to decide that they've had enough and decide to go out and act on the news that they've been given. This is the type of thing that causes Charlie Hebdo shootings, the type of thing that causes the Pizzagate shootings, right? I think you are actively playing with the kind of lives. But the second aspect we'll engage on is how hegemonic corporations oftentimes can control these news corporations. So companies like Volkswagen, companies like Volkswagen, companies like Amazon have a significant hold within social media companies. This means that they're likely to post things that they claim as factual or just don't claim whether it is factually correct or not in approval of these sites, right? Why is it so that if every company posts about how abusive and controlling Amazon's factories are, that a few companies don't? It's because Amazon has an active hold within those companies. But not only that, they're likely to post things that are in support of these sites that say that they don't treat people that badly. We think that's illegitimate. You harm out the most vulnerable in society. But finally, we think it's principally predatory. So if media outlets are all run by the most elite and they leak out into circumstances that cause your elections to be bad, this leads to things like the fact that your welfare might be worse off, your unemployment benefits might be worse off because you were given fake news about how this candidate is going to treat you. We think that hurts you as an individual and not really those people at the top, not really those elite. We think that's illegitimate, but also for the fact that it hurts the social interaction on the ground. So things like racist rhetoric being posted online about how they think certain races are like genetically different from others can hurt you on a scale where it creates this identity that you are subpar from other people. We think those things are always posted on the kind of social media. But the second thing about accountability, right? Under status quo, there is literally no check and balance for these companies. One reporter can post it, but then nobody else is going to follow up that one reporter. These companies have no intention to disseminate this information. They can just hire new reporters and new reporters. There is no check and balance when it comes to that. This means that they are going to be scared by the fear of the law, that they will be fined, that they may, in some instances, risk probable jail time or suspension. But the second thing is, it also prevents these cycles of harm, because once one person gets fake news, they talk about it, they constantly go about it in their personal life, and they act on that information within any social interaction. We say this is the same reason you spit on Chinese people during the coronavirus, is because of intentionally racist news that is proposed to be fake but is spread to you anyhow. But the final thing is, opposition's going to come up to you and tell you a bunch of laundry lists about how somehow we are going to crack down on investigative journalism and how we prevent that. We are going to say that is illegitimate, for the fact that the reason is we're still going to allow all of this investigative journalism to exist. The only difference is we want it to be proven. All and any examples of investigative journalism being harmful, they are only because they are false, because they create a lot of harm in society that cannot be reversed as proven. Ultimately, panel, we've told to you why fake news corrupts democracy and why there's no accountability on their side. And for that, anything from this point on is derivative of those concepts. Thank you.
I thank the Prime Minister for his speech. I'd like to invite the Leader of Opposition to open the case for side opening opposition. Hear, hear.
Hear, hear.
Give me a second. What kind of joke is this? Okay. Start! We agree that social media lacks accountability. However, it is this accountability that breeds vibrancy in democracies. There are two main issues flaws underside government's case, right? Firstly, on the issue of hegemony of media. Secondly, on why specifically social media. Let me take down both of these points one by one. Firstly, is social media the main the main kingmaker in determining whether or not people become racist, people take out their racist intentions? We tell you that this is not true, right? Often people post things in social media just because politicians have said it. Most importantly is that many people are inherently racist. That's why they are prone to being swayed by all of these so-called fake news, right? Often it is also politicians who influence what people think. Therefore, we believe that it is unfair for government to only blame social media while not regulating what politicians say if they are really into what the harms of fake news towards people, right? Secondly, is that people often come to their own conclusions with or without the interference by fake news in social medias. Because if you are a white supremacist, you walk down the street, you see a bunch of Latinos, you don't have to go on social media to know that this is happening in your country right now. This means that often people come to their own conclusions without social media. Secondly, is social media really liable? Now, it seems that side government wanted to just assume that social media are the ones who churn out these fake news. No, it is just random news agencies out there or random blogs that tell people that, hey, coronavirus has a cure and its cure is traditional medicine. Or that, some political jokes or something that detriments politicians of some sort. All of these, if they really want to hold and prevent all of these from happening, they should not target social media specifically. What burden will we on side opposition take? Firstly, we will prove to you that social media is important in safeguarding democracy. Secondly, we will prove to you how even if governments don't interfere in how social media take down fake news, this will inherently push social media to take down every news that possibly might cost them. Thirdly, we will prove to you how people nowadays are better educated and therefore less prone to fake news. Now, all my other rebuttals are integrated within my argumentation. Firstly, my first argument is freedom and protection from fake news is mutually exclusive, right? So notice that under their side, they are going to hire a panel, an army of people to take down and flag whatever article that they consider as fake. Sure, even if they were to argue that this can happen independently without of government interference, without sending government cronies to head these armies of fake news editors, right? We tell you that this is still harmful. Why? Because notice that who will be the ones who will hold these social media liable? It is the government themselves. Therefore, if the government were to take them to courts, just have a lawsuit with them, make them lose millions of dollars and taint them under a bad light, claiming that Twitter is the platform for fake news. All of these hurt social medias a lot, right? What does this mean? This means that, sure, you might have a panel who wants to try to preserve as much true news as they want. However, they are also under extreme pressure to take down every news that they view as suspicious and possibly might lead them to a loss, right? Especially when you have lots of shareholders, you have lots of investors who are eager to make a profit out of your company. Therefore, all of this, right, social medias would rather take down every news that they view as potentially fake, even ones that are made by whistleblowers. Moving on to my second argument on how all of this is extremely vulnerable, how social media is important to maintain a vibrant democracy. Now, what are social media actually used for? They wanted to just argue in the context of first world nations. Look, this is a globe. Social media operates everywhere. In third world nations, in nations where there are dictators, people can access Twitter by using their phones, and they organize protests just like what Hong Kong did, anti-government movements, and they can do this because they are perfectly anonymous. However, if you allow government interests to seep into these social media platforms, what do? Governments would pressure social media platforms to make sure that favorable news get out there, even though these are fake news. As long as they paint the opposition in black light, sure, these can be considered as can receive the green light. However, non-favorable news, for instance, once written by whistleblowers and investigative journalists, will immediately be taken down. Notice that often mainstream media are averse to even use to even publish articles written by investigative journalists in the first place, because they know that if you have an abusive government who knows how to cover up any single case, then this whole article is going to go down the drain, even though there's a morsel of truth within it, right? Because ultimately, who determines whether or not it's a truth? It's the government itself, right? But before I continue,
Taken.
Yu Cheng, you are fighting against.
can you please write your POI? I don't know how this website works.
It's okay. It's okay.
Okay, so this means that social media is a breeding ground for progression, because lots of investigative journalists take up there, and they can, especially, also we know that governments have an incentive to target social media specifically. As just like how Donald Trump always claims that every news against him is a fake news, we tell you that this is equally likely to happen under side government, right? All of these would just breed corruption and government inefficiency. So what is the comparison here? We agree that sure, social media will influence people to a certain extent. However, we tell you that this is still democracy, because politicians are equally liable to mudslinging and fake news, right? Whatever that Trump said in his political debates often are just what fake news that government wanted to argue as. So we tell you that as long as politicians don't change, societal structures don't change, people will still be liable, people will still be gullible to fake news, and all their harms will still happen under their side. For all reasons, side with side opposition.
I thank the leader of opposition for their speech. I'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to extend the case for side opening government. Here, here.
Start.
Chair, we think that the problem with side of opposition is that they confuse fake news for biases within governments and how governments will crack down upon political opposition. Recognize the cracking down upon political opposition will happen on both worlds. This is a question of fake news where we're able to prove that this news is directly fake, that it doesn't have much like evidence or basing to prove this news, and hence we can hold individuals accountable. Recognize social media companies are giants which make billions of dollars out of the spread of fake news, because they're able to garner viewership and have no direct interest to curb the spread of fake news, because recognize all the money they make, the profit, the advertising that companies direct or like individuals pay them when these individuals spread fake news, gives them a perverse incentive to let fake news spread. And recognize if we don't hold social media companies accountable, this means that we can never directly target the spread of fake news. Several rebuttals before I move on. Firstly, the first thing the leader of opposition says is that politicians are the problem because people listen to politicians and hence are influenced. Recognize that this doesn't like directly deal with what we told you. We told you that social media, that people go onto social media to find information. Oftentimes it's to read. Oftentimes it's because they're confused. It's because they want to find out about issues. The point at which you say politicians are also a cause doesn't mean that you don't tell us why social media company also doesn't spread fake news. Recognize that oftentimes what politicians say oftentimes have counter narratives within society. But when it comes to social media, these fake news that spread, oftentimes individuals don't have a counter narrative towards it. Oftentimes individuals are led to believing it, which is why we told you several reasons for this. Recognize that oftentimes there's things within algorithms within social media, which means that individuals are only fed information within their circle, which means that the information and the fake news within that circle, it's very difficult to opt out of it. It's oftentimes individuals are like to believe in this, and we think this is a harm within political sphere. But recognize the reason why politicians get away with populism and like fake news is because individuals believe in it. The reason why individuals believe in it is because of a cycle of fake news, because individuals oftentimes are fed with rhetoric and narratives, and this comes from social media companies. This comes from social media discussions, which are oftentimes skewed, which is why we think we need to target social media as a cause. So politicians can also be another factor, but this doesn't mean social media aren't accountable. But secondly, they say people come up with their own conclusions and people make their own decisions. This doesn't deal with how social media directly affects that, which is how we've already told you. The third thing they say is that recognize that social media, there's like random news agencies which are spreading fake news, and it isn't social media itself. Recognize social media have all the agency and all the clout because they're the platform where this news spreads. This means that they can actively take measures such as, number one, actively curbing down on companies which fake news within social media. This means actively taking down or reporting or like actively curbing the spread of fake news, because recognize we're not punishing posting of fake news, we're punishing the spread of it, which means social media companies were directly negligible. They were negligent in curbing that spread. They could have actively taken measures in terms of, for example, having counter narratives promoted directly to curb the spread of fake news. This means actively correcting it and making sure it's published directly, having all these measures which they were negligent to, so we think that they're also liable. The third thing they say is that people are educated. Recognize all the outcomes about how Brexit happened, about how Donald Trump happened, all the fake news that people believe in and directly regret today. This shows that even though people are educated, they're still vulnerable to the spread of fake news, and it has happened in modern day society. And even though people regret those decisions, it's irreversible. The economic harms, the political harms have already occurred, and we think that not curbing it means that it's irreversible harms that you do not tell us how you tackle. I think it's simply naive to say people are not prone to fake news because it happens every day. The fourth thing they say is that governments, and this is a large part of their case, they say governments will intervene. Governments will crack down upon people who spread fake news, who spread they will make people believe that their opposition are spreading fake news. Number one, this isn't mutually exclusive. It happens in status quo. But secondly, we never said that governments will be the ones who hold social media companies liable. This can be any party. This can be NGOs. This can be this can be any party who is able to properly prove within courts that social media companies were negligent. If governments were the ones, and this probably happens in Western democracies where you're functioning like a functioning judicial system. Recognize if governments want to hold their opposition accountable, this means that they have to actively prove why that news is fake. It isn't easy to prove a news is fake if that news is actually true, but it's just skewed towards the opposition. There needs to be direct consensus. That it isn't easy, and we don't think governments will have the ability to prove or crack down upon opposition. Plus, this is totally different from things like the Hong Kong riots or protests. They never claim that their oppositions are fake. They just crack down upon that. That's in an authoritarian state. We recognize that in these scenarios, we need to actively prove why that news. Governments need to actively prove why that news is fake. We don't think that they can crack down upon any news just because it's opposing to their party. The last thing they say is that people like Donald Trump also claims everything against him is fake news. Recognize this will happen on both worlds. It's a comparative on the spread of fake news, and we think we're able to curb this the best. But extending on what Jerome said, why we need to hold social media companies liable, and they're the most important target. Recognize any other platform that we try to hold accountable isn't going to work, because all these platforms are relying upon social media to take actions. Even if we're going to punish individuals or punish certain companies, oftentimes this isn't going to work because it's a never-ending system. We need to hold social media companies liable so they end the system. The reason being, if social media companies finally have a reason to not spread fake news, this looks like actively incentivizing policies such as reporting straight away, taking down fake news, curbing the spread of having the spread of counter narratives straight away. All these policies, which means we curb the spread of fake news on a national level and not an individual which is too messy, never been prouder to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their speech. Now I would like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to continue the case for side opening opposition. Hear, hear.
Start.
If you are an investigative journalist and you write an article about corruption happening by and perpetrated by the Prime Minister, Deputy Prime Minister, and all his cronies, how are you to prove that your piece of article, whatever pieces of evidence that you provide, documents, pictures, videos, how do you prove that it is true if it is not backed by the government? Now, it seems that side government has been extremely dismissive to whatever analysis that was provided by my leader of opposition. We have clearly told you that firstly, social media have an incentive to just maintain their investors, to make sure that they earn a profit. Therefore, if any NGOs out there can pinpoint to them that they are spreading fake news, there is an extremely big incentive for social media to hire a team of people to take down whatever news that give you a suspicion, to prevent expensive lawsuits which would dent their profits and scare away investors, right? Secondly, they never really dealt with the issue on who actually decides what is fake news. Now, let's go back to the story of investigative journalists, right? How do investigative journalists actually make sure that the piece of article that they write is actually accepted and causes lots of is actually accepted and action is taken, right? They do this when they post it on social media, when it causes lots of discourse, when people talk about it and say that, hey, maybe it is true, and they go on the streets and protest and take actions and prompt government to take action, right? Why would this not happen under their side? Because firstly, social medias would have already taken it down on the basis that, hey, your evidence might be fake, that it might be fake news, because whatever news that is not ratified by the government yet is in fact a fake news, because the only way how you can prove that your news about corruption is true is by taking it to the courts, and when the courts decide that these politicians are really corrupt, this is only when your article becomes true, right? However, that doesn't happen under side government, because under their side, it is already deemed as fake news from the start. It has already been taken down. You prevent all of these discussions from happening. You prevent allegations from even breaking through into the courts in the first place, right? Therefore, it is extremely harmful that under their side, they want to curb social media. So, okay. Now, they are extremely obstinate on three things. Firstly, on how social media is in fact liable to all of these things, even though we have clearly told you that social media is not. Secondly, there are also assumptions on how social media is the only is the last straw that breaks people and causes them to turn chaotic and nationalistic. And we will break it down one by one. Firstly, on the issue of whether or not social media is really liable. Note that social media is not really social media is not The Economist, it's not Al Jazeera, it's not any mainstream news platform that we all know about, right? Instead, it is a collection of individuals that no one can control. People post pictures, whatever they want. People post remarks of politicians, memes, and whatever it is, right? What does this tell you? This means that social media has no control over what their people want to say. So how would this control look like under their side? It's essentially censorship of what people want to post, right? What does this mean? This means that firstly, you are not just attacking the wrong people, because people who spread fake news are not social media, it's the people themselves. Even if it is true that fake news should be tackled, you should tackle it from bottom up, right? From the people who pander these fake news in the first place, whether or not it's bots hired by Russians or foreign interference, right? Secondly, is that under their side, censorship is vulnerable to capture by the state, right? Because notice that often NGOs are not the ones who are most equipped to take on lawsuits against social medias. They might not have enough funds to do so, right? Especially when social medias are so huge, much larger than the government itself, right? What does this tell you? This means that people are already discouraged to take action against social media. So who will actually be taking actions? It is the government, especially when the government has a large incentive to do so, right? Okay, so to do so, what does current trends actually tell you? Current trends actually tell you that people are better at safeguarding themselves against fake news. Why? Because people nowadays are much more educated. Sure, they might pinpoint to nationalists in the Brexit referendum how fake news are there to tell people the wrong things about the benefits of Brexit, right? We tell you that these fake news play little role in actually influencing public opinion. Even if fake news don't exist out there, people will still vote under nationalistic lines that Britain should exit the EU. Also, even if social media isn't out there, politicians will pander the same thing, and whatever politicians say will go on social media anyhow. This means that your fake news that you wanted to say will go mainstream anyways, right? And pander to and influence people. But before I continue, sure, Maya.
Taken. The reason why investigative journalism oftentimes fails is the minute one investigative journalist is proven to be false, politicians say every investigative journalism is false. We are okay with investigative journalism. It just needs to be substantiated. And even if it doesn't come out in the early stages, we're okay for it to be substantiated and then come out so it's actually proven and action can be taken.
Okay, notice that investigative journalists, what are their proof to their claim? Just documents that people might say that it's doctored anyways, just footages of individuals that people might claim was photoshopped. What does this tell you? This tells you that it is highly probable that under your side, these social media companies will take it down anyways. In fact, if investigative the articles written by them will go on social media, Trump will call it as fake news. Trump will take action against it, whatever how, right? This means that under your side, you will box investigative journalists out. When people are educated, what will happen to them? People are much more likely to better differentiate between what is fake news, what is not. People know what is scientific based, what is not, right? This means that natural change already happens. And if they really want to tackle the power of fake news, don't attack fake news itself, attack the nationalistic pride or egocentric beliefs in the first place. That is how you better make sure that people are less gullible to fake news.
I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for his speech. Now I'd like to invite the Member of Government to extend the case from side closing government. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're.
Start. I think that the problem coming from this side opposition was the fact that I think that the problem and the solution was mismatched to begin with. They talked about how investigators journalists are going to be prevented from publishing their articles if the government are intervening. I think that would happen on their side of the house as well, no matter the fact where the SNS are accountable of spreading fake news or not, right? When authoritarian regime are happy to censor those kind of information without the existence of motion or not, still within that those kind of articles are going to be censored, right? We don't think that the problem coming from the side government is mutually exclusive. So, two things to talk about in my speech. Number one, I'm gonna prove you why those media social media companies are actually accountable. And number two, I'm gonna talk about how it is going to change the society, the practical effect that is going to happen after the motion. So first of all, talking about why why corporations are actually accountable briefly. So we think that the DLO told us that there's many resources that are providing fake information and we should restrict that. Note here that it is pragmatically impossible to restrict all of those fake accounts to begin with, right? Because we say that there's many resources and accounts that would provide fake news on social media platform. And as for police investigation, it is practically impossible to find out the identification of that account and who actually organize and who actually operate those accounts, right? On the comparison, we say that social media corporations are possible for that because they don't really need to identify who actually operate the account. What they need to do is just to stop and suspend those accounts from operating, right? They can just press a button and stop the account from operating. We think that the social media network, social media platform are this platform that is actually spreading out the fake news resources. And we say that without the existence of social media platform, we don't think that those fake news are likely to spread out in the society. And therefore, we think when the consequences are huge, as the opening government has proven to you, we think that it is practically better to begin with and principally justifiable as well to actually stop and make the social media platform liable for spreading out the fake news. So moving on, how it is going to change the society. So I think that the opening government did a pretty good job to show how the status quo is devastating and how social media is responding. But we think that they lacked on analysis how the status quo is going to change after this motion. So I'm going to prove you what is going to happen after this motion. Note here that this analysis is crucial in this debate because of the fact that without the pragmatic benefit taking this motion, all the argument that opening half made to depict the status quo is bad won't have any meaning because we don't know for sure whether the status quo is actually going to change. And I'm going to prove you that it is actually going to change in a better way. So within that social media, when we take this motion, they are going to have the incentive to actually deal with the status quo where many accounts are spreading out fake information. Why is that? Number one, we say that when they fail to do so, their reputations are going to go down, right? Because we think that the reputation from users are actually one of the most important things for social media companies, because the reason why those users are actually relying on social media as a new source of information is because that they are actually disappointed with the traditional news information, right? They think that those traditional news information are being manipulated by the authoritarian regime or other capitalist people, and they rely on social media network to be provided with this new kind of information, provided with the true information, right? And when a certain kind of information will reveal that was a fake news, obviously their reputation as a platform is going to decrease, and many people less people are going to use those social media as a source of collecting new information, right? And we say that number two, in general, because they don't really want to pay a huge amount of compensation, or because as a member of executive board, you don't want to be arrested. Obviously, as a whole corporation, they would avert its way to prevent fake news from spreading out in those platforms, right? So what kind of measures are they possibly going to take? We think that they are going to do through suspending accounts that are liable for fake news. They are just going to press a button and stop that account from spreading those news, or they are going to make the self-identification much more rigorous, so that the person who have actually spread out the fake news would no longer be able to create a new account on the social platform. So how is this going to make a difference? We say that when once these kind of measures are being implemented, we think that the amount of false information would diminish. No, thank you. Why is that? Because we think that the source of false information would no longer be able to spread out the hatred information to begin with, right? We can't just say that in USA, like Muslim people are inherently criminal, because that is factually incorrect. And when social media network and when SNS companies finds out that, like, they are obviously going to stop that, right? So number one, we say that like fake news, fake accounts are no longer be able to operate it. But number two, we say that even for those individual levels, they are going to be less disincentivized to spread out fake news, because once they do, they are no longer be able to use the social network platform anymore, right? And therefore, we think that because a social network corporation would have incentive to censor fake news when they realize, and obviously they're going to delete those kind of information, the amount of fake news is going to diminish on our side of the house. So why is this important? We think that number one, the purpose of social media is to make social discourse and to provide true information, right? That is the reason why many people are actually using those platforms to begin with. But number two, we say that principally, the social discourse is going to be better off on our side of the house, because the true form of democracy can only be gained with the true kind of information, right? When many people are going to believe in fake news, we think that they are equivalent to be manipulated by other people, right? Such as you regret the choice to support Brexit because you thought that Brexit was because you thought that Britain was paying so much amount of money to EU. And we think that these kind of for fake information will provide provide fake basis on those democracy, and we think that it is going to be better on our side of the house in terms of democracy. But we think that principally we say that people have the right to know the truth, and the existence of SNS under the current situation is preventing that. Therefore, we are happy to propose.
I thank the member of government for their speech. Now I would like to invite the member of opposition to extend the case for side opening opposition. Here.
Can everyone hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Here.
Okay, thank you.
Start.
Mr. Speaker, this debate is not about fake news is good or bad, but this debate is about whether social media should be held liabilities and how people are going to consume the news in both sides of the house and which kind of world is going to get better. So the extensions coming from closing opposition is very simple. Number one, we'll tell you why it is unjust to hold social media social media liabilities on the spreading of fake news. But number two, I'll talk to you about the comparative of the counterfactuals. Why is outside of the house a more progressive social discourse about the news going to happen, but that is less likely to happen under the government side. Most of the rebuttal is going to be integrated, but people that's two main rebuttal for the closing governments. So closing government believe that censorship is not mutually exclusive because dictatorships going to censor this anyway. But note that is not true, because dictators only can control the news within the nations. But when it comes to social media, the server is not actually inside the nation. It is controlled by the other third party that nation doesn't have control of, and therefore the news thing can be spread out and the discourse thing can be formed in the first place. That's exactly the reason why Arab Spring still get success on the platforms such as Facebook or Twitter without even under the supervisors of dictatorship regimes in that kind of scenario. So we don't think that censorship is going to happen in both sides of the house. But secondly, if you look at the logic coming from closing government, they believe that social media is a major platform for people to consume news. It's because people believe that social media is out of control of the government. But note that if you follow that logic, now government is actually controlling social media, because government going to decide what is fake news or not and what social media can actually spread out. Therefore, if you follow their logic, the users in the first place will not and no longer believe in social media as a form and as a resource of news anymore. And therefore, all that the practical outcome that they're going to talk in this app about how social is going to get better and people can consume better news on social media is going to collapse. With that has been said, now moving on to the extension. Number one, why principally it is unjust to hold social media liabilities on spreading fake news. So we think that you only can hold liabilities for two criteria. Number one, if that is the direct cause of the problems. And number two, that you have the ability to fix that and does not actually violate your right and not really something that like cause conflict for yourself in the first place. But now let's take a look at those criteria on the case that we're talking about. Number one, is social media the direct cause of the problem? So opening government believe that like people went to social media with the impression that like all the news are being filtered, and therefore social media spreading out the news equal to like making the fake news itself. We don't buy that premise. Not that social media is a platform for people to talk and share about their story. It's to connect people and to make them discuss about a certain issue. So in the first place, social media is not the platform to spreading the news, and it's not the platform to produce the news in the first place. We don't really think that like therefore that is very responsibility in the first place to really control and really decide what news is fake news or not. That is simply like when you take a look at when you take a look at like social media, it's just the meme for people, and that you don't really criminalize the meme in that case, but you criminalize the people who use that meme to spread out the social media. We think when you just put that cap like the whole liability on social media, it is wrong. But secondly, we think that like, it is an unfair burden for social media to deal with the fake news. Because if you take a look at the model coming from both opening government and closing government, what they are going to do, they cover the news from the news media, or like they ban and suspend a certain accounts of the users. All that kind of thing requires social media to access to a certain private information of the user in the first place. For instance, where they live, what kind of new resources that they actually acquire from in the first place. Which means that like now you put social media on a dilemma that like whether or not they violate user privacy for the sake of like filterings, or like they have to like be a neutral platform that people can share the news. And that dilemma is unfair, Mr. Speaker, because in the first place, news and fake news is not the responsibility of the social media, and now government is just pushing those kind of burden on social media to resolve in the first place. They have the right to actually do the business, make the algorithms, and like controls, and have the right to keep the users' privacy information. That is their promise, and that is how they conduct business. But when now they put under the dilemma that like, hey, whether or not like you going to be punished by the government, or now you actually violate your promise and violate the whole construct business model in your of yours. That is when social media now is actually the unfair burden push in the first place. We think that is unjust in the first place, Mr. Speaker, to push and to make social media to have liability. But secondly, let's talk about the pragmatic outcomes, because we think that should be on the comparative here in the first place. In their side of the house, when social media is under control of fake news, how people are going to consume fake news, how people are going to consume news now. We think the way that people are going to consume news in their side of house going to be very one way and very unilateral. The reason being here is now in their side of house, literally social media is going to be confirmed that like news that all being filtered. So people are going to only subscribe to the new resources that they already be familiar with. Fox News and conservative people going to subscribe to Fox News, liberal people going to subscribe for BBC or CNN in the first place. That created echo chambers in this situation, Mr. Speaker, and no progressive discourse going to happen in that side of the house. When now people all believe that like, their news, everything is fake news, it's all true news, and like, no one going to discuss about that. And therefore, the things happen like Brexit, or the thing happen like Donald Trump or populism is going to increase in their side how when there's no progressive discourse going to happen. But compared to that, why not side how when news are freely spread on social media? We think that is better. We admit that there is certain point of time when like, there's real fake news to be spread out. But when there's that kind of circumstance, we have the comment section when people can actually comment on that and say, hey, that is fake news. And then people can argue whether or not that is fake news. People can actually talk about that and make arguments on for and against those kind of things. And those kind of progressive socialists, not only and unity can happen if social media remain neutral, no intervention of the government or of the social media to filter any kind of news in the first place, Mr. Speaker. And that is much better, because that is when vulnerable people in outside house can actually voice out their idea, voice out their problem, can form social movement, can actually push people and spread the news and make people realize the problem that's sometimes being censored by the government in the first place. That's how Arab Spring actually taken place, Mr. Speaker, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that's only happen if social media remain as a neutral platform for all people to accept and all people to discuss, and the discussion and the way people consume, it's going to be two-way, where the news spread out and people comment and actually make discuss about that, rather than that people like blindly blindly buying that kind of news and therefore no discussion, more echo chamber. Very proud to oppose.
I thank the member of opposition for their speech. I would like to invite the government whip to conclude the case for side closing government. Here.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Thank you.
Start.
In my speech today, I'll be proving why it is the fault of the social media companies that fake news is being spread, and why it's justified to punish them in the after plan and the tangible benefits that this will have on society. Now, first, I'd like to refute the opening opposition. They said that censorship is bad, but we also think that censorship is bad, but usually the principle that says that censorship is bad because it prohibits people from seeing the truth, right? You're seeing like a filtered version of the truth, and we think that for people to be able to access the truth, it is necessary for rampant lies to be managed through censorship. We agree that censorship is bad, but filtering out fake, blatantly false news that has the potential to harm people, to save people from drowning in a pool of lies and fake news, is completely justified. From closing opposition, there was this they talked about how social media will be censored with government intervention. But we think that they have completely neglected the fact that social media corporations are independent. And in a majority of the cases, because they're independent, it's unlikely that there will be government manipulation. And even if government intervention happens, we think that social media companies are profiting off of the fact that they are separate from the government. And if social media companies want to continue making money and continue providing a safe space for people to share their opinions, they wouldn't want the government handling all of the stuff that goes on in social media. So social media companies also have an incentive for the government to not filter everything that happens in the social media. Now, going to our point for today, which is the after plan. We think that, as the member of government also mentioned, the opening government has proven that fake news is bad. They've also proven that social media companies are responsible for a lot of fake news. But we think that we need to talk about the after plan, how social media will be incentivized to not spread fake news, and this will increase the amount of the right news, the true news. And we think that this would happen for two reasons, because the reputation of the social media company would go down if they were being penalized for spreading fake news, and secondly, because the entire corporation will work to spread the right kind of news. So let me paint a picture of what would happen after we take this motion. So why is it bad for social media outlets to not be held accountable? As the member of government also talked about, we think that people join social media to gain insight to news, right? People want to be enlightened. People want to share information and ideas. People want discourse. And that's why people join social media. That's the uniqueness of social media, and that's why it exists in society. We think that if we do not take this motion and people are spreading rampant lies everywhere that could cause real psychological damage to people, the purpose of social media is not being fulfilled. And when the purpose of social media is not being fulfilled, we think that it's extremely detrimental to society, because people will be infiltrated by fake news.
Taken.
The Great Firewall of China has taken down all fake news. Have people accessed the truth?
The Great what of China? Oh, okay. Sorry, I wasn't able to hear the first part. A firewall, okay. We think that China is a different story, because based on censorship and based on infiltrating not just fake news, but what the government wants them to see. So we think that that is an irrelevant case in this debate. So going back to what I was saying, we think that the purpose of social media and the reason social media exists in society is so that people can discourse, people can say whatever they want and gain new insight. And we think that if this insight is blatantly false and it's completely erroneous, we see there is no point in social media existing. If you say something about, let's say, Brexit, and you get a response and it's just completely false, and you act based on the false news, we think that it's extremely detrimental, and we think that this is violating the people's right to knowing the truth. People have a right to know the truth because people have a right to know the truth because it's bad if people act based on what's not true. That's manipulation, that's deceit, and we think that because this right exists and because we think that it's important that we uphold this right and that social media has this kind of presence on society, we think it's extremely important. Now, if we do take this motion, as I mentioned earlier, there will be more news that is not fake, so true, like right kind of news that's not inherently racist, or that won't provide real psychological damage to people, or won't incite irrational fear into people. If there are more true news, we think that people will be able to make rational decisions and act based on what's true. And yes?
Taken.
Why social media have the responsibility to provide the truth for their users?
So we think that even if social media, we agree that social media is not the only outlet that's releasing fake news. There's tons of newspapers and TV outlets that are releasing a lot of fake news, but given the widespread use of social media, especially among children and especially among teenagers and of all age groups across the world, wouldn't taking this motion help mitigate the amount of fake news? We think that it's unrealistic to say that social media filtering out fake news from social media would completely eradicate all kinds of fake news, but we do think that it would help mitigate the amount of fake news and mitigate the amount of people that are being subject to these fake news, these biased fake news. And we think that this is very important because it's important that people know the truth. Because when people know the truth, that's what democracy is based on. That's what people taking rational actions that benefit themselves is made of. And we think that this is very important. And for these reasons, I beg to propose. Thank you.
I thank the government whip for their speech. Now I'd like to invite the opposition whip to conclude the case for side closing opposition here.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Start.
The question of this debate today is so clear. Should social media companies be held responsible for the spread of fake news? So the burden of proof of the government bench is that you need to show us why social media is the main factor of spreading fake news in this case, and secondly, the mechanism of how we can have a better political and social discourse from the very beginning. We want to note that social media still remains so neutral in the world nowadays. We can see it through three main things. Number one, they still have the discourse to disprove all the fake news from the very first start. Number two, they are providing a cheap and available accessibility for everyone in the society, even the minority, to access to their platform and raise their voice on that kind of platform. Three, we still have the report system on social media for other people to utilize it, and that's how social media is still remaining neutral in the world that we can see nowadays. But first of all, some rebuttals come into the case of CG. They say, first, they can find out identity of users who post it online. That's why they should be held responsible for that. Three main rebuttal. Number one, they are not the one who this is their job from the very beginning to do so. But number two, they need to have filter in this case, which means that they are the one who deciding what is fake news or not from the very first start. So if it is the case, they are giving the right to access what is right and what is wrong and what is fake news to the hands of some executives of social media and some heads of social media, some elites in the society, as they claim from the very beginning, which is create much more unfairness in the world that we can see in this case. But number three, if they are not the one who decide, so they still have to consult from government. They still have that's why it's linked back to our team's case about why we are giving the government too much power in this case. Democracy is where everyone can get access and raise their voice, and that's how the mechanism of speech benefits democracy and increase the objectivity that we can have on social media. But secondly, they claim that we will disincentivize the social media to spread fake news because of reputation effects and deterrence, and we can create true form of democracy. Number one, I want to remind you again, the social media is not the one who creates fake news from the very first time. We want to notice that politicians, political parties, and social movements always have the incentive to influence people to gain more reputation and power from the very first time. So they can never incentivize all these kind of people, all these kind of political parties to spread out their ideologies from the very beginning. So the question now becomes that which form of lobbying is better on our side of the house? We do believe that there are a lot of backlashes on their side, because when they move to conventional media, when they move to political campaigns only, that's how other people have no way to have the market mechanism and the checks and balance system that we have already claimed from the very beginning, which is more crucially in this case that at the moment when you deter a lot of people from spreading their news, you are also deterring the minorities from using that kind of platform, the only available and cheap platform that they can really get access to, and that's how you are taking away the only form of framing the movement and gaining their rights again of all the minorities, the LGBT community, the poor people, and the feminist movement, and other kinds of movements that we can see on social media nowadays. Come to the case of OG, where we have already worked over OG in this case. From the very beginning, I think OG has a very inconsistent factual context from the very first time. Number one, it seems so naive coming from their side when they claim that everyone can hold liable, that everyone can hold liable in the DPM speech, right? If this is the case, there is a little legal punishment on social media, which also means that there is deterrence effect on the social media, even if they are true that IGO, big corporations and organizations can stick a ban on fake news on social media. They lack a mechanism of how it can really work from the very first time. So the unclear model and the unclear status quo from the very beginning makes it is really confusing, and that's why they can never win this debate. But number two, they misunderstood the spirit of the motion from the very first time when PM based on the whole premise of their team's case that social media is producing the news themselves, right? But TPM fixed this by saying that no, we will punish them for spreading it. But under any circumstance, they haven't proven to us why social media is the main contributing factors for all these kind of things. So they have no principle justification for us to hold them responsible for that thing. The only thing that they stated is that they can control them, right? But we engage them by saying two things. Number one, we are willing to catch all the one posting it to the one posting it if fake news, if this fake news really cause the harms in this case, not social media. But number two, we still have the report system to solve all these problems. Why we have already won on principle ground? Because we tell you three things. Number one, social media is just providing you a platform, then opening more, and they are opening more room to for people to raise their voice. So they are not directly caused to they are not the one who directly caused all this kind of fake news from the very beginning. Me, it's the users who spread it from the very beginning, and it's out of control of social media. And we move to our conclusion in this case that there is the unfairly burden distribution for social media in this case, which our didn't clearly pointed out the conclusion from the very beginning. But the last thing is that no checks and balance system, they still have the checks and balance system on our side of the house, right? Because different parties with different ideologies will hate each other. That's how they will point out all the weaknesses and all the fake news from other people. When you follow Donald Trump, of course you can still read a lot of comments hating Donald Trump and pointing out a lot of Donald Trump weaknesses in the comment below of all these things. Why is better on our side? Because their side is more likely to form the echo chamber in this case. If they go to conventional media outlets, it's more likely for them to stick to that media outlet because they have more trust in that kind of conventional media. But on social media, where everyone can use this tool, we can increase the objectivity because of that easy and cheap accessibility. That's how we are providing a better political and social discourse on our side of the house. But lastly, why we are better than OO in this case, because we have a better justification. We look at the real comparison of this debate. But lastly, we prove to you a counterfactual and more clearer and better impact. We told you three things. Number one, we have better political and social discourse. Number two, we provide accessibility for the most vulnerable group in this society, the minority. Lastly, backlosses of government landscapes. And that's why we should vote for CEO with this debate. Thank you.
All right, I thank the opposition whip for her speech. Now let's conclude. I also like to ask her to conclude her speech. All right.
Reflection.